So at a point, we got to hold ourselves accountable for what we may not get and stop looking or asking or thinking that other people owe us something when we have the ability to get things ourselves. And we can go to the marijuana license, you can go to tourism, as you said. So when you talked about not getting a check written or whatever, because I take exception to that. You know, when you have a we're all black people filling this room. Where are your politicians at to support this effort? Okay, so we have to lay the responsibility where the responsibility should be laid sometimes within ourselves and not look for other people to do things. So I think your check may be coming, Lou, but make sure that we put it on the onus of who should be doing that and not putting it with our friends who really want to support us, but the power ain't necessarily there.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Oh, thank you. And we're going to move to the next question. Give a round of applause. A great comment. And we can do, I prefer we not wait until after the presentation if you have questions, because they're holding lunch for us and we want to get through this part. And what I did have this fourth chair is for Joyce Fitzgerald. I'm sorry, Miss Joyce. Could you please come up, please? This is your chair and you're supposed to be right here. Yes. And let's go to our second question. And our second question, we're going to go to Mr. Stephen Lee and talk about his comments as it relates to funding for non-governmental organizations under tourism. In the state of Maryland, although we do have a grant fund, the grant fund is restricted by mandate to only go to certain governmental entities. How would you, Mr. Lee, advocate or put a position that there should be a grant fund for NGOs under tourism to apply for?
The way you phrased that question is a bit challenging, so I'll sort of rephrase it, just tweak it just a bit. I'm not sure how I would go about grant funding specifically for tourism, and to some extent, being in this room all this time, I feel like I'm a fish out of water because everybody here is so strictly tourism, where I'm history and culture, and I see tourism as just as one part of that bigger picture. And my preference is for our existing programs in tourism, in art, Maryland State Arts Council, in the Maryland Heritage or Maryland Historical Trust, which is the biggest of them all, that they would become more inclusive and fair and just in their allocations. However, historically, that has not been the case. I want to go back to your comment. We should be asking our state representatives, our elected officials, why? Why are you not demanding equity for our community? We should ask our city representatives that. We should ask our directors of city offices that. The city director of the Baltimore Heritage Office. We should ask them why, of the millions of dollars you give out every single year, is not a single black NGO getting a penny of it in a city that's majority black. That's unconscionable. And it's unconscionable of us as a people to not demand of our representatives, our leaders of departments, our elected officials, to not demand justice and equity for us. What I think we could do, to go back to what you're saying, is form an alliance. And this is a little, I don't know the right word, I don't want to say surreptitious, but form an alliance, for example. And this alliance apply, for example, to the Maryland Heritage Office for a group of, as I said, an alliance of African American NGOs. Let them refuse to grant that. Then I think we have a very strong case. You know, when we fight individually, we're weak. But as a solid alliance applying and demanding justice in these grants, when they turn that down, that gives us a more powerful forum to fight with.
Well, let me rephrase it, Mr. Lee. Thank you. Let me rephrase the question, and then we're going to have Ms. Fitzgerald introduce herself. As a member of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, you and the commissioners work with the Maryland Historical Trust on the planning to implement a Maryland African American Heritage Preservation Grant, which is a $1 million statewide fund. My question properly asks, how would we create then a $1 million African American Tourism Grant Fund for people across the state who do tourism programs to be able to apply to, because the tourism grants available now through the Maryland Tourism Development Board are restricted by mandate to DMOs, county tourism offices. How then would we as an alliance, if you will, get in a position to advocate for a $1 million grant fund for tourism as we've done for preservation?
You're putting me on the spot here.
Well, you're the commissioner.
That's okay, and you're right. I'm a state representative. Ask me, tax the Maryland, go to one of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture meetings and ask us commissioners, what are you doing to improve the situation? Again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I'm not only an advocate for tourism, I see it as just one part of a much bigger picture, our history and culture picture. And I'm going to go back to what you were talking about, the African American Heritage Preservation Grant, which is currently administered by the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. If any of you are not familiar with that grant, there's a call for entries right now. I think the deadline is coming up in a few weeks, but please take advantage of it. I believe all things are yin yang, and it's great that we have that grant, but to me, it's a tragedy that in 2018, we have to have a segregated grant fund for Black people because the record is so outrageous for decades that they won't fund us fairly. So you set aside $1 million, which sounds like a lot, but when you consider that's for the whole state, that's not so much. But we're going to have a segregated grant fund for the Black people. Okay, baby steps, right? Baby steps. That grant fund is for capital improvement. Since I've become a commissioner, which has only been 2 years, and I don't mind you questioning me, hey, I welcome you, because I'm going to say it's up to all of us. I have been pushing for getting a complementary fund, the other side of that coin, for Black programming, which tourism would qualify for, which our Black museums and cultural organizations could qualify for. There is very, very little state-supported funding for Black programming, which is what you're talking about. And that's what I've been fighting for. When my term as a commissioner is up, if I have succeeded in getting a complimentary grant program for just programming, I will feel I have done something in my term. But that's what I'm fighting for.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.